Somewhere in Manhattan right now, there is a lawyer who will make $12 million this year. Not the firm, the lawyer. One partner, 1 year, roughly $12 million in take-home profit. His name doesn't matter, but his firm's does. Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen, and Katz. In 2025, its average equity partner cleared about $12.15 million each. That's not salary. That's their personal share of the profits after everyone else in the building got paid. Now, a few hundred miles away, there's another lawyer. She also owns her firm. She's smart, she works hard, she went to a good school, she passed the same bar exam. And this year, after all her bills are paid, she'll take home somewhere around $40,000. Same profession, same basic product. A difference in pay of something like 300 to 1. Here's the part that should bother you. Those two people might be running businesses with almost identical profit margins. And here's the part that should really bother you. If you decided to open your own law firm tomorrow, nothing about your intelligence, your work ethic, or your skill as a lawyer would tell you which one of those two people you're going to become. Because owning a law firm is not really a story about law. It's a story about a machine most lawyers don't even realize they're operating. So let's open it up and look inside. Let's start with the one number that breaks almost everyone's intuition about this entire business. You'd assume that a lawyer who sits down and works a full 8-hour day gets paid for 8 hours of work. That's how a job is supposed to work. You put in the time, you get the money. According to Clio's Legal Trends report, which pulls anonymized data from tens of thousands of real firms, the average lawyer in 2025 collected payment for about 2.4 hours of an 8-hour day. 2.4 out of 8. So where do the other 5.5 hours go? This is the single most important mechanism in the whole industry, and it's called the funnel. It works in 3 brutal stages. Stage 1 is utilization. Out of an 8-hour day, only about 38% is actually spent on billable work. The rest is email, admin, chasing clients, and running the business, none of which anyone pays you for. That's roughly 3 billable hours. Stage 2 is realization. Of those billable hours, only about 88% ever make it onto an invoice. The rest gets written off, discounted, forgotten, or quietly eaten to keep a client happy. Now you're down to about 2.6 hours. Stage 3 is collection. Of what you do invoice, firms actually collect around 93% because some clients pay late, pay partial, or never pay at all. And that is how 8 hours of a smart, expensive professional's day melts down into 2.4 hours of real money in the bank. Now hold that number in your head because it's about to explain everything. Our $40,000 lawyer? She is living at the bottom of that funnel with no way out. When you're a solo practitioner, you are the product. Every dollar the firm earns has to pass through your 2 hands and your one finite day. Clio's data shows solo practitioners have some of the lowest utilization rates in the entire profession, sometimes barely a quarter of their day, because they're not just the lawyer. They're also the receptionist, the bookkeeper, the marketing department, the IT guy, and the collections agency. Solo lawyers also charge less per hour, around $288 on average, versus about $345 at bigger firms, for the same reason a corner store can't charge what a warehouse chain charges. So the ceiling is baked in. There are only so many hours in a day. Only a fraction are billable. Only a fraction of that gets collected, and you're charging a solo rate for every drop of it. Industry compensation data has long pegged the average solo practitioner's income at around $150,000, and plenty of them land well below that, which raises a genuinely uncomfortable question. If a solo lawyer is smart enough to pass the bar and run a business, why is that ceiling so low? And how on earth does the guy across the country pull $12 million doing what looks like the same job? The answer is the one thing the solo doesn't have. And it has a name. It's called leverage. And in the legal world, leverage doesn't mean debt. It means people. Specifically, it means other lawyers doing the work while someone else keeps the spread. Here's the trick sitting at the heart of every large, wildly profitable law firm. A first-year associate at a top firm, following what's known as the Cravath scale, earns a base salary of about $225,000, which sounds like an absurd amount of money to hand a 25-year-old fresh out of law school. And it is a lot of money. But watch what happens next. That associate is expected to bill around 2,000 hours a year. At a big firm, those hours get billed out to clients at maybe 700, 900, sometimes well over $1,000 an hour. And for genuine superstars, rates today can climb past 2 or even 3,000. Run the math on 2,000 hours at even 800 an hour, and you get about $1.6 million in billings from a single associate. You paid them $225,000. Even after the funnel takes its cut and you cover that associate's share of the overhead, the firm keeps an enormous spread on that one person. Now multiply that associate by hundreds, sometimes by thousands. That spread, the gap between what associates bill and what associates cost, does not go to the associates. It flows up to the people at the top, the equity partners, the actual owners of the firm. This is why the metric that obsesses big law firms isn't salary. It's PEP, profits per equity partner. It is quite literally the leftover profit divided among the owners. And this is where the biggest misconception about elite lawyers completely falls apart. You probably assume the partners making $8, $10, $12 million a year are simply the best lawyers in the building, the sharpest legal minds, the ones who win the unwinnable cases. Some of them are. But that is not what they're being paid for. They're being paid for ownership of the machine. Their income isn't really their own billable hours because one human being can only bill so many. Their income is their slice of everyone else's spread, plus the clients they personally pull through the door to feed the whole system. In their most recent rankings, the 100 largest firms in America, the AmLaw 100, booked a combined $158 billion in revenue in a single year, with equity partners averaging over $3 million in profit each. At the very top, Kirkland & Ellis alone brought in more than $10.5 billion, and firms like Wachtell paid their equity partners north of $12 million apiece. Those partners aren't rich because they're 300 times better at law than our solo. They're rich because they own a piece of a machine that turns hundreds of other people's hours into profit. And here's the quietly ruthless part of the design. The pyramid only works because most of those associates will never reach the top of it. Only about 1 in 10 associates who start at a big firm will ever make equity partner. The rest are, in cold economic terms, there to generate spread. They bill their 2,000 hours, they collect their salary and their bonus, which at the top firms can run from around $20,000 in year one to over $115,000 for a senior associate, and then in most cases, they move on. That structure is not an accident or a tragedy. It is the engine. Which brings us right back to our solo lawyer. You can see her trap with fresh eyes. It was never about talent. She is stuck at the bottom of the funnel because she has zero leverage. She is the only set of hands in her entire business. And that reveals the real, brutal, unspoken truth about owning a law firm, which is this. When you start a law firm, you are not actually starting a business. Not at first. You are buying yourself a job. And very often, it's the worst paying, highest stress job you've ever had. And remember, who's doing the buying? The median law school graduate walks out owing about $112,000 in student debt. And once you add undergrad, it's closer to $137,000. Meanwhile, the median working lawyer in America earns around $151,000 a year, which is a good income, but it is a galaxy away from $12 million. Legal pay is famously bimodal. A small cluster of graduates lands those $225,000 big firm jobs, and a much larger cluster lands somewhere between $60,000 and $100,000, with almost nobody in between. So the person deciding to hang out their own shingle is often carrying 6 figures of debt into the most financially fragile version of the profession. There's a concept the accountants who specialize in law firms talk about constantly, and it's called false profit. Here's how it sneaks up on people. A solo or small firm owner looks at the bank account at the end of the year, sees a little money left over, and thinks, great, my firm was profitable. But they never paid themselves a real market salary for the 40, 50, 60 hours a week of actual legal work they personally performed. If you had to hire someone to replace you as the lawyer, you'd pay them well over $100,000. Subtract that real cost, and a huge number of supposedly profitable firms are quietly running at a loss. The owner just never noticed. because the one thing they forgot to pay for was themselves. This is exactly why margin, the number everyone fixates on, will lie straight to your face. Picture two firms. The first is a solo with basically no staff and an 80% profit margin, which sounds spectacular, and who takes home $40,000, because 80% of a tiny number is still a tiny number. The second is a heavily leveraged firm with a mediocre-sounding 20% margin whose partners each take home $1 million. Because 20% of an enormous number is enormous. Margin tells you almost nothing about what actually lands in your pocket. Size and leverage tell you nearly everything. So how do the healthy firms actually structure the money? The classic rule of thumb is the rule of thirds. You take every dollar of revenue and split it three ways. 1/3 pays the people who do the work. 1/3 covers overhead, rent, staff, malpractice insurance, software, marketing. And 1/3 is what's left over as profit. Hit that, and you've got a genuinely healthy 33% margin, which is roughly the benchmark for a well-run firm. The problem is that overhead is a hungry animal. Industry data suggests the typical firm actually spends closer to 45 or 50% of revenue just on overhead, and every dollar of it comes off the top before anyone even whispers the word profit. Malpractice insurance you're required to carry. Rent in a location clients will take seriously. Staff salaries you owe whether or not your clients paid you this month. And here's the cash flow knife. Remember the funnel. You pay all of those bills now in real time, but the money you're owed gets stuck in what the industry calls lockup. The average firm waits around 3 months between doing the work and seeing the cash. So you are floating payroll and rent for months on income that hasn't arrived yet. And thanks to realization and collection, some of which is never going to arrive at all. And just to keep things interesting, the ground underneath this entire model is starting to move. Corporate clients are pushing back hard on hourly rates and demanding flat fees and alternative arrangements, which squeezes the very spread that makes leverage profitable in the first place. Private equity has begun buying into law firms in the places where the rules now allow it, hunting for exactly these inefficiencies to optimize and consolidate. And artificial intelligence is quietly threatening the billable hour itself. Because if software can do in 6 minutes what used to take an associate 6 hours, then the entire business of selling time by the hour starts to wobble. The firms best positioned to survive that shift are the ones learning to sell expertise, judgment, and outcomes. In other words, value, rather than raw hours ticking on a clock. So let's go back to where we started, to our two lawyers, and finally answer the question we opened with. What actually determines which one you become? It comes down to a single decision about what kind of thing you're really building. If you want to own a law firm and get genuinely wealthy, you cannot simply be a great lawyer selling your own hours, because your own hours are capped by the funnel and by the 24 in a day. You have to become the owner of a machine. You build leverage by hiring other lawyers. You keep the spread between what they bill and what they cost. You obsess over the funnel and plug the leaks in utilization, realization, and collection. You charge for value instead of just time. And you pay yourself first, deliberately, so you never fool yourself with false profit. Do all of that, and the same $225,000 associate who looks like a terrifying expense on your books is quietly generating over $1 million in billings and building your fortune while you sleep. Refuse to do it. Insist on being the hero lawyer who personally does absolutely everything, and you will have bought yourself the most expensive, exhausting job in America, sitting right next door to a partner making $12 million a year off the very same product you sell. Because that's the real economics of owning a law firm. It was never a contest over who's the better lawyer. It's a question of who understood they were building a machine and who thought they were just practicing law. Now that you can finally see the machine, the only question left is which one you'd actually want to build.